afternoon, good evening to wherever you are joining from. My name is Dr. Aditi Mukherjee, and I work with the CGIR, where I'm the director of the Climate Impact Platform. Formerly, I was a principal researcher at IWMI when we had started this webinar. Exactly 1 year ago, I was reflecting that on 29th of August last year, our first speaker, Reanalysis, she had spoken about the impact of colonial laws on the current status of water management in Maharashtra. And I was very happy to learn recently from Twitter that Ariana has recently completed her PhD. This seminar was meant for early career researchers from around the world who work on water, food, or climate-related issues to come and share with us, IWMI India researchers, some of their insights so that we can learn new things and be inspired by it. So in that series of early career researchers, in the first phase, we have just 14 of them, and today is the 12th one. We are very fortunate to have been joined by we are very fortunate to have been joined by Dr. Haider Ali, who is a research associate and Renkai ESR fellow in the School of Engineering at Newcastle University. He has around 5 years of experience in engineering and environmental hydrology in research, with a focus on understanding the effects of climate change and extreme rainfall events and flooding. A topic I think is on everybody's mind, especially if you are joining from Delhi, given the extreme rainfall and the flooding all of you witnessed just a couple of days ago. His research interest includes trend variability and physical understanding of changing extreme events, temperature scaling, monsoon systems, design flood estimation, and water resources management. Developing methods for understanding the extreme precipitation and temperature relationship using quality control sub-daily precipitation data has improved physical understanding of global rainfall climatology and resulted in several high-quality publications. So this work that he was involved in was featured twice in Editor's Highlight on EOS. Haider is also interested in climate impacts and risk, working on the intense a project Future Drainage, which is on flash flooding and hydroclimatic projections based on CMIP 5 downscaling. He's currently working on GCRF Living Deltas project, improving the understanding of changes in tropical cyclone activity and monsoon over the Southeast Delta. And addition, he does other things around climate modeling for the Living Deltas Hub. So over to you, Haider. We are very happy to have you here. And you have around 25 to 30 minutes for your presentation, followed by question and answer from everybody who has joined this webinar. And also this is being recorded and will be posted on IWMI website and shared online later on. So over to you, and thank you once again.
Thank you, Aditi, for the very long introduction. So so here, in these half an hour of my presentation, I will be talking, very different aspects of how we are utilizing different types of data sets to perform different types of climate change-based studies. So, I will give you a brief idea about the different works I have been doing in a couple of years. So I did my PhD under Dr. Vimal Mishra from IIT Gandhinagar. And I finished that in 2018. And after that, I have a research associate with Haley Fowler at Newcastle University. So, in this presentation, I will be talking about the different aspects. Like, first of all, I will be focusing on the flooding in Indian subcontinent, especially about the Delhi floods, which is happening now. And then I will move towards the temperature scaling. And at last, if I get some time, I will be talking about the tropical cyclone activity going on in the Ganga-Brahmaputra and Meghna Delta. So just to start with, so I think it's imperative to talk about the Delhi floods, which is going on, and the crazy picture, which we are seeing of New Delhi. So, on Thursday, we saw that the height of the Yamuna has reached to this very 2,208.48 meter, and we saw water over Delhi. And there have been different, reasons for this. This is scary picture of Delhi. It could be because of the extreme rainfall, flash flooding, or this multi-day precipitation extremes happening over the Delhi. And there are other reasons as well because of the water which was released from the Hatnikon barrage. And I think the most important thing about here is this picture. If you see, this picture shows the portraits from the 19th century. You could see a river flowing through the area beside the Red Fort. And what we see now is the road and all the urban structures, which has been, which has gone through the urbanization. And in some way, the river is claiming its, original, territory back. So very similarity in these two pictures. You see a river flowing through this flyover, something like that, and you see the same, the treat of river again. So it's pretty thing to see that we have, snatched the landscape from the nature, and it's somehow trying to claim it back. Yeah. So here, we need to discuss about the science, what's happening. What's the reason of such situation in Delhi or in Indian subcontinent, or even the whole world? We see, different examples of this flash flooding because of this extreme rainfall or multi-day precipitation extremes. The whole infrastructure, it fails to withhold the excess runoff due to these extreme precipitation events happening because of the climate change. So the first thing I'm showing here, is a paper study, which, I did in 2019 with Vimal Mishra and a PhD student, Parth Modi, and which showed, the multi-day precipitation and flooding events are projected to increase in the future, and the changes are significant. And because of that, I think, the runoff, the stream flow, which are we going to see in the future, is going to be a risk. So if I show you a couple of figures from this paper, so this paper talks about the more 3-day precipitation extremes in the future and more flooding events in the future. So if you see a figure, just, I won't ask you to go into a detail, just see the colors. So, the very light color shows less changes in the future, and very dark color, red color, shows very higher changes in the future. So if you see, these two panels, the first one goes for the RCP 2.6 scenario, and the other one for the RCP 8.5, which is a high emission scenario. And for these two changes from the historic period to this, near future period. So you see more changes, more number of extreme events in the future. And the changes are more for the high emission scenario as compared to the lowest emission scenario. And these changes are significant for the Ganges Plains, lesser for the Indus Plains, but are significant for the Ganges Plains. So now the next interesting thing is that how are these transformed into the flooding? So this figure talks about the changes in multi-day flooding events. So we have used our rainfall from CIMEP 5 GCMs, and we ran this one-dimensional NOAA MP model. And we were able to simulate this stream flow for the future. And we again see that these number of flooding events, the 3-day duration, are going to increase in the future. And these number of events can increase up to 30, 20, and more than 30, even 36 goes up to that. And these changes are higher for high emission scenario as compared to the lower emission scenario. For the far periods, for the far future periods from 2016 to 2019, these changes are very high. So it's interesting, to see what's happening. Why we are seeing these higher precipitation extremes with global warming, with the climate change. So there is a need to study the relationships, how these precipitation extremes are linked to the warming. So for this, we have done extensive research on finding a linkage between extreme rainfall and rising temperature, and which we define as the temperature scaling. So it's just, in the next slide, I'm going to define what it is basically. So as we know, I don't know if you have heard about this Clausius-Clapeyron relationships, which says that with warming, the ability or the capacity of the atmosphere to withhold moisture increases with warming. And this, relationship says that, the ability of atmosphere to hold this moisture can go by 6 to 7% for a degree rise in temperature. So if we have a time series of a rainfall, so for these dates, we have this rainfall. So what we basically do, we extract these extreme rainfall values, and we find the corresponding temperatures, and we fit that to we fit a regression line. So we are taking all the precipitation values and we are taking the corresponding temperature values. And we are simply putting a regression line. And the slope of this regression line tells us about what's the relationship, for what will be the percentage rise in the extreme rainfall with the rise in temperature. And we define that as a temperature scaling. So I will be using this scaling word in my coming slides. Yeah. So there's a lot of work and a debate going on because the studies which have been utilizing scaling approaches to develop a relationship between rainfall extremes and temperature. If we use wrong methods or wrong scaling variable, the message totally changes. Our results are not in the line of classical relationship. So we came up with this study, which was which gave very contrasting results actually. The previous studies have been showing, a positive scaling, a positive relationship between the rainfall and the temperature, but to a certain threshold of temperature. And once it goes beyond this threshold, there was a negative relationship. So we came out with the methods, with the reasons, what were the reasons because of this deviation in scaling. And this was one of the first studies which showed that if we use the better scaling variables, better temperature, so we can have this positive scaling. So I will just show you an example that what happens when we use different scaling variables. When I say scaling variable, it means with different types of temperature. So here the first panel shows just air temperature. So you see, these precipitation extremes are going to increase. They show a positive relationship to a certain threshold, and then they are going to decline. But if we use this tropospheric temperature, the temperature which is measured at 850 hectopascal at a high sometime like a 1 kilometer high from the sea surface level, so we see a positive relationship. But if we use dew point temperature and we see a relationship, so the scaling curve keeps going on increasing. It's like up to in the line of CC. So this exercise showed that if we use a set of proper scaling variable, we can expect a positive relationship between the extreme rainfall and the temperature. And what happens then if we change the scale of the data, if we go from the daily scale to the sub-daily scale? So this study, because at that time we were not having hold of good quality observations, so we were relying on different alternate sources of precipitations like GSOR, which is somehow global summary of day data, which is measured by the airport authorities, and we had like around 60 stations over India. But the other alternate to the precipitations were TRIM, CHIRPS, and 3RD TRIM data. And this figures shows that if you see the color, so the DR95% per Kelvin is the scaling rate. So it's just the slope of that, these slopes of this, we see this orange color line. So we see a very, very high, scaling rates to like 30 or more than 30 at a very local scale. But now the question is that, do we really trust these results? If we talk about the magnitude of the change, or magnitude of the scaling rates, are these, alternate source of precipitation good for these climate change studies? So, the next thing was to look over the, observational data. So we can get this, precipitation data, observational, and at a good temporal scale. So for this, we started, working on this study. So, so this was part of this intense project with an aim to have hourly station data all over the globe. And because of this project, at the end of the project, we were able to have hourly precipitation data for around 25,000 stations all over the globe, focusing. I mean, the data was more available for various macro regions. So, I mean, just looking over the points, I'm not talking about the numbers. So, I mean, our data was, I mean, we had like 3,000 stations over US and 974 stations over the Europe, for Australia 602. And for India, we were able to have 42 number of stations. And when I say this data, I mean, we have, I mean, lots of papers which show the, I mean, the quality of the data. I mean, it has been extensively quality controlled. And it is, I think, one of the best data which we have now for the, for conducting, I mean, these studies at early scale. Plus for UK, I mean, we have, I mean, data up to the 5-minute scale, even for 2-minute scale. So I think this is one of the best data, I mean, which have been utilized for to conduct various, I mean, studies in this project. So what I'm trying to show here is that, I mean, using hourly precipitation data from this intense project, the name of the data is GSDR, Global Subdaily Rainfall Data. So we can see that, I mean, scaling is in the line of Clay-Clay-Prone relationship. So, I mean, this estimate 6.17 is the median scaling over the entire US, and which is somehow, I mean, which is one of the first study which shows that using observations and a better quality control methods, we can show the scaling in the line of CC, Clay-Clay-Prone relationships. But as we go deep down into the local scale, we see that the number of stations which shows super CC scaling like 40% or more than 40% per Kelvin rise in increasing temperature are like 48% or 6%. So, I mean, at the regional scale, the relationship between extreme rainfall and the temperature is up to CC. But as we go down into, we go deeper into the local scale, we see that local processes and different systems, which, I mean, makes scaling more higher. So, I mean, the next question was, I mean, so we don't have observations over the entire globe. So can we trust these different alternate sources of precipitation, I mean, like reanalysis products? So we, I mean, we as climate change, I mean, we as a modeler or research doing in the climate change, we, I mean, rely on different reanalysis products like ERA5, MERA2. And a couple of years we have, I mean, utilized a number of precipitation products. And are they sufficient to conduct, I mean, these climate change based studies, or we do need to rely only on observations? So, I mean, this study published in GRL, I mean, focuses on two, I mean, reanalysis products like ERA5 and MERA2. And that we tried to, I mean, just repeat the whole exercise using, I mean, GSDR at ERA5, a reanalysis product. And we saw that the ERA5 here, I mean, if you see just US, the colors, I mean, so, I mean, they correspond to very lower scaling rates, I mean, which we don't see in the GSDR data. We see very, very high scaling in the GSDR data. So, I mean, we see that the reanalysis products gives very low scaling results as compared to the observations. So what is the reason? What is the reason? Is it because of the uncertainty in the precipitation or the uncertainty in the dew point temperature? Because we are only using two, I mean, types of data for, I mean, estimating scaling. So next we checked what's the reason behind this deviation, behind this underestimation of scaling. So we came to know that the ERA5, I mean, show, I mean, very, very high bias. I mean, so when I say bias, so it's like, I mean, GSDR rainfall minus ERA5 rainfall upon GSDR rainfall into 100. So the percentage bias in ERA5 is very, very high. I mean, for India, it's like up to 70%. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, so does it mean that we can't use ERA5, I mean, data for India because it's underestimating extreme rainfall to that high, to up to the 70%? And even for the MERA2, it's even more, I mean, worrisome. I mean, for these macro regions, we see very high biases in MERA2. So, I mean, it's imperative, I mean, to know, I mean, what, I mean, these, are these available, I mean, reanalysis progress really good to conduct climate change based studies? Because during while we conduct any study, we really don't talk about, I mean, the how good is data, but we talk about more results. I mean, what results do we get during using those data sets? But I think at this point, I mean, we need to, I mean, make ourselves sure that the data which we are using, I mean, for our studies, I mean, it should be good. I mean, yeah, I mean, we have a limitation of observations that are observations. I mean, we don't have observations over India. And in the absence of observations, we need to rely on these different sources of precipitation. But I mean, are these really good to conduct these climate change-based studies? So the next thing which I'm going to show is about one more, interesting thing, that even for the observations, I mean, if we do not quality control our observations, the results from our studies are going to significantly change. So here I'm giving you an example of two GSDR versions. I mean, so one version is raw data, which I call as raw data because it's not well quality controlled. And the other version is GSDR QC, which is very, I mean, quality control data. And we see a significant difference, I mean, in the scaling rates using GSDR and raw data. So if these blue colors and red colors show the differences in scaling rates, which comes from the uncertainty in the data set. This work was also featured, this work was like published in GRL and highlighted by the editor, which shows that the, the uncertainty, arises from the data and the methods which we are using for these studies. So if we dive deeper, what's the reason? I mean, why do we see these differences in scaling from the raw version of data and the quality control version of the data? So I'm going to show you one example, how this rain gauge data looks like and what are the errors in this rain gauge data which gives us the wrong results. So if you see this red color, is the quality control data. So these, lines, long lines. So, y-axis x-axis starts from the duration of data from in hours. So it's like 0 to, say some number. So the red shows for the quality control and the blue shows for the raw data. And since, sometimes we don't have any data. So, the values corresponds to -999. So that's why you see these red lines, which we can just ignore. So we can just focus on this positive part. And when you see, these blue, we don't see these very, very high precipitation values up to like 450, 500. So if you see, we are getting this 500 in 1 hour, which is very absurd. And it was reported in the NOAA data, and this data has been used in multiple studies, either for scaling or for the other purposes. And just relying on this NOAA data, if we use these very, very high values, we're going to get very long results. So, for example, in my case, when we are conducting scaling studies, so these are two forms of the graphs, the scaling graphs. So the red one is GSDR QC and this blue one is the raw data. So we see, a very different scaling curves. For the blue one, we get a negative scaling. And for this red one, quality control, we see a positive scaling. So what is the reason? Because, we digged into the time series and we found, errors in the this raw data. So we are getting, a few, readings as 508 per hour, which is absurd. It's just like breaking the world record. And there was, a few values, which were in the multiples of 2.4, which was the precision of the rain gauge station. So basically, these were the transcription errors. The decimal points were kept wrong, and because of that, the values were recorded very, very high, which was not the case. So we have this multiple number of flag and checks which we are applied to the data for the quality control. And after this extensive quality control, lots of papers has been published in this line, and the code is actually available for free access that you can use that a quality control code for your studies, for your data to improve that quality. So till now, I have been talking about, the need of observations and the faults in satellite and reanalysis products for the climate change studies. The next exercise will be, focusing on the tropical cyclones and how using, better data like CMIP6 high-resolution models. So, so we have developed some protocols, especially the Met Office, and they have, they are able to have a good resolution of models up to 25-kilometer resolution. And those models are really good in representing different tropical storms characteristics. So here, in this small exercise, which have been published recently in GRL, I will be trying to show that how better are these final resolution models in simulating these tropical storms characteristics, and what is the picture? We are going to see in the future. Are the tropical storms becoming more intense? What will be the frequency, and what is the change in the tropical storms characteristics in the future? So for this, we have, so this is my study region, the GBM, Ganga Brahmaputra Meghna Delta. We have utilized, a different, 13 CMIP6 high-resolution models. And we have used different types of tracking algorithms like Tracker and TempXX. So, if someone have been working in this domain, must understand the need of using different type of tracking algorithms. So one focuses on the vorticity track, and the other focuses on the uses mean sea level pressure as their feature. We have used one high emission scenario, these 13 models, and we are, so I will skip this slide if someone wants to discuss it. Just to focus on the result. So we see, an increase in the frequency of the tropical storms up to a certain point, and then a decline. And so this holds true for one tracker and for and for the high resolution models. So when I say high resolution models, they are up to 25-kilometer resolution. But in the lower resolution models, we don't see a similar picture. And if you just talk about the blocks, so this blue blocks talks about the future period, and this orange box talks about the historic period. So in the future, we are going to see a lesser number of tropical storms as compared in the historic period. So the historic period was up to 2015, and future period is from 2015 to 2050. So, based on these results, we are going to see a decline in the number of tropical storms events in the future. But the interesting thing is that what will be the change in the intensity of the tropical storms? Are they going to be more intense or less intense in the future? So for this, we have estimated the intensity of the tropical storms. And we see, the intensity of tropical storms in the future is going to increase. And these high resolution models, which are green in color, show a higher increase in the intensity of the tropical storms as compared to the course of the red color models. And very interesting thing is about if you see the change in the distribution of the tropical storms. So red shows for the low resolution models and blue shows for the high resolution models. And these dotted shows for the future, and this solid line shows for the historic. So one thing is that there will be a shift. There's definitely a shift. If you use these very high resolution models, they are able to capture these very intense tropical storms. And we don't see such tropical storms using this low resolution model. But in the future, if you see these dotted lines, they extend to more intensity of the tropical storms. So we see that in the future, the number of very high intense tropical storms will be more. The intensities of the more intense tropical storms is going to increase in the future. And we have lots of figures which show that even the available cyclone energy and the intensity of more intense tropical storms are going to increase in the future. So it's interesting, that we have, utilized different types of trackers and different types of resolution of the models in using, in studying such type of studies. And we say that if we use better, when I say better, it means about a better, resolution, horizontal resolution. So coming down from 100 and 250 kilometers GCMs to 25 kilometers GCMs, we are able to have, our models are able to capture very high intense tropical storms. And given limitations in regional in GCMs, our models, project a decline, but an increase in the intensity of more intense tropical storms in the future. So, I will wrap up now. I think I took my time of 30 minutes. I will now encourage, for a good and healthy discussion that how can, the first thing is that can we collaborate? Other thing is that, how can we use, our results, our studies to have an advancement in the science? Yeah. So I will encourage everyone to have, what if they have some comments on this work, or if they want, they have some unclarity. So I encourage everyone to have some discussions about these slides. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Haider. That was really, really fascinating. To anyone who has questions, please type your question in Q&A, and we would elevate you to a speaking right, so you can ask your questions directly to Haider. To start it off, Haider, my question was, is a lot of these scaling part related to not having enough long-term observations, because the kind of the observations in the US far outnumber the kind of observations you had in India. So is it something to do with the historical observation itself? And related to this, my question is that, so does it mean that for every region, you have to do the scaling coefficient, which is on an average between 7 to 9? Has it got to be exactly exact? So does it mean that places which have, I think it's obvious, places which do not have a very good historical high quality data simply would not be able to project future climate change all that well. So that would also mean a lot of challenges to future adaptation in those places. So if you take all of those together, how do you see the policy angle coming from your study? I think from the data perspective, it's a very fascinating study, shows the importance of high quality, high frequency data. But what do you do if you simply do not have that? And possibly, I don't even see Africa covered in any of these. Possibly the data availability is even poorer there. So how do those countries, which traditionally for various reasons and reasons related to, all kind of socioeconomic, politics, colonialism, development, could not set up these kind of high resolution database, how are they to go ahead and manage the future risks?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and it's a very open question, to be honest. There's no answer to it because, yeah. So these are the experiences. At the places where we had observations, and we were able to check how good were the different alternate sources of precipitations. For example, for US, we have a good network of rain gauges. We were having rain gauges which had these different measurement precision up to like 0.25 mm. So it's easier to check the quality of data coming from the different sources for the regions where we have data, observational data. But for these regions where we don't have observations, like you're talking about Africa or even in India, we only have like 42. So it's worrisome thing. How we going to then have these climate change based studies, and what will be the confidence of those results which we are going which are having because of these alternate sources of precipitation. For example, Reanalysis products. As I come from India and we have done a lot of extensive work over India, we call Aero5 a really good precipitation product because, and even MSWAP, chirps. We have utilized different types of sources of precipitation. And in the absence of observations, we did not get a chance to, check the data quality of other data sets. We have published, different types of work. And yeah, at that point, we need to make a statement. We just can't, say that, okay, observations are not here, so we are relying on these precipitation products. So, what I mean to say is that this is the worrisome thing, because, we have done, we have used, different other sources of precipitation and came up with different results. So at this time, we need to, check and analyze, that what we have published or what we say to these policymakers, is it actually right? Or is it because this uncertainty comes from these uncertainty in the precipitation products? So, it's difficult, in the absence of the observations, that how we are going to define the confidence, the confidence in our results. Yeah.
And yeah, I see Shreya's hand, and this is particularly a developing country problem. Again, we know this is again another way in which climate injustice perpetuates the inability to predict or project the future due to lack of data, because these countries already had a whole lot of development deficit originating in various things. So I think I would be at once, Shreya's asked her questions, and I'm sure my other colleagues have it too. I would kind of wonder if there are other products. Reanalysis is one, but how far that remote sensing GIS takes us, does it take us far enough? Are there alternative sources of enriching the data? What do we do with what we have is kind of my question. But over to you, Shreya, please.
Yeah, just to add, Aditi, I think, based on my personal experience, if we don't have observations, I think MSWAP is really good data because we have, different papers coming up of it. And MSWAP has really, if we have, checked it against, GPCC and all of the precipitation products. So it was one of the best data, to conduct these climate change-based studies over India. Yeah. Yeah. So the question from, I see a question in Q&A section from the Manoranjan Ghosh. Would you mind explaining the temperature scale a little bit? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think I rushed it. Yeah. So the first thing is, what is the temperature scaling? So it's basically, so if I go just from the basic, you see a time series of rainfalls. For example, we have this for different days in a month, we have some precipitation values. And we obviously have this corresponding temperature data. For each day, we take out a precipitation data and temperature data. And we fit this precipitation data to the y-axis and the corresponding temperature data to the x-axis. So examples that if we have 20 years of data, then we have this on y-axis, we have rainfall, and on x-axis, we have temperature corresponding to the day where we all have these observation values, and we fit a regression line. So basically, simply, we are fitting a regression line. There's no, very complex thing going on. This regression line gives us a slope. The slope of the regression line is the scaling coefficient, which I'm calling scaling rate. So now the question comes that there are different methods, how we are fitting this regression line. It could be binning method, it could be quantile regression. So we have developed, a number of methods how we can estimate scaling. So, if you really want a detail, I think you can just look over this paper, consistent large scale response of our extreme precipitation, because we have, extensively worked on this field. How, the good robust scaling methods and choice of better scaling variables can give us a robust scaling estimates. Now, your second question, part of the question was which temperature variable we should use for conducting scaling studies. So based on our experience, and I think especially for India, in India, monsoon, you see when it rains, the day it rains, you see a decline in the temperature. So if it's going to rain in the next few hours, you see that it's very cloudy, it's windy, and the temperature cools down. And if you do scaling using that air temperature data, we see a negative scaling because it's just like the temperature values are declining. Temperature values, are declining during the time of the rainfall. So, it brings your precipitation values toward this side, and you see a negative scale. So for surface air temperature, we see a hooked structure. The scaling curves appears to increase up to a threshold and then goes down. But for the other sets of temperature, like tropospheric temperature, tropospheric temperature could not be an observational data. So, we'd rely on the dew point temperature, which is the indirect measure of humidity. And this dew point temperature in the literature, in my papers, we have shown that this is one of the best temperature data to conduct scaling studies. Yeah. I hope, your question is
yes. Thank you very much, Haider. Thanks, because as an environmental social science guy, these are very important foundational research like we look for. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this was the the idea behind this paper, because we were able to see a very different scaling rates when we use dew point temperature instead of air temperature. Yeah.
My next question should be in a global scale. For example, so if we want to
study. Monoranjan, can you hold on your question and let Shreya come in, and then you can come in? Shreya had her hand raised earlier. Just hold on and please come in.
It's all right. I think Monoranjan has a follow-up question, so we can finish with that.
Okay.
Yeah, section of questions. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Shreya. Thank you very much. Haider, my question is related to if we want to model the global atmospheric relationship between the temperatures and the precipitation, then what would be the temperature? What would be the methods? Like, should we go for like the dew point temperature or like the tropospheric temperatures?
So we have, after, our two papers, we have focused more on the dew point temperatures. I think, this is one of the best, temperature scaling variable, which should be used for conducting scaling studies, because using this temperature scaling variables, the scaling results which we get are in the line of CC. And I think if you just see Google Scholar and my profile, you will see a series of papers which shows that if you use dew point temperature instead of surface air temperature or other sets of temperature, you see consistent scaling, and which is what we need. Yeah. I could have shown you our papers, but I had this restricted time, so I didn't have all my papers here. Yeah.
No problem. I'll go through your work. It's really interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, Haider, just quickly, my question was a little bit on the use of normals. There's a lot of dependence on the idea of normals when we try to assign sort of the idea of extremes essentially comes from the idea of normals. But normals themselves can sometimes be misleading. Have you, what kind of methods are generally used to ensure? So the reason why I'm asking this is that because all of these extremes in terms of precipitation and temperature are actually experienced either in terms of, say, perceived temperatures, or whether a rainfall or an extreme really creates a flood-like situation or actual vulnerability depends on how infrastructure is designed according to these so-called normal values. It is always designed for these normals. So that is why we do not have enough space for the extremes. So when you try to communicate these extreme events to, say, governments, policymakers, planners, etc., how do you ensure that these are taken into consideration while planning? So for instance, in Kolkata recently, this summer when I was there, the actual temperature said 37 degrees and it said under that feels like 52. And it was not a heat wave because the actual temperature is not above normal. But when your experienced temperature is 52, then you are adapting as a person to 52 degrees, not to 37 degrees. So in terms of experience, it can be different from what it looks like on paper when it comes to extremes. So even with Delhi, for instance, the flooding, of course, there is a precipitation element, but because infrastructure and how it is developed and how it is designed according to that normal is also so important, is that something that you generally make a part of your science communication while talking about extremes? And is that considered within the analysis? Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Shreya, actually, for raising this. So I think it's important. I mean, so as a researchers, or I mean, when we see a very like audience, I mean, so we do not really talk about extreme. I mean, we just mention extreme. But if it's a very common audience, we need to have a proper definition. And I think we've published a chapter in some book. I mean, talking about just focusing what the extreme is, because extreme could be, I mean, different for the different regions. For example, just you talked about the heat wave for India. I mean, when 50s are 50s temperature, I mean, are heat waves. But in UK here, I mean, we get 30s temperature, so we call it a heat wave. So yeah, I mean, extremes, the definition of extremes has to be different for the different regions. And even in this non-stationary climate, you know, we see, I mean, as our climate is no more stationary. I think at some point of time, we need to revise, or I mean, show, I mean, what these extremes are. I mean, so I mean, I think, I mean, it's not so straightforward to define an extreme. I mean, it's very, very, I mean, localized somewhere. So the extreme, which can be for me, for one particular study, can be different for the different studies. So I think it's very specific. I mean, which type of climate change studies we are going to do, and then we need to define the extremes. And yeah, I mean, so even the definition, if we are using a different definition of extreme, I mean, I think it's going to change. So in the terms of heat waves, I think the definition of how we are defining a heat wave is going to change the results. I mean, so are you just focusing on the air temperature, or you're including the humidity as well? You're only using this air temperature, or you're using this Tmax and Tmin for the day? So, I mean, over this couple of years, I mean, we have been trying to solve this, I mean, to solve this controversy or this question, but I think it's not so easy or straightforward to just come up with an answer. Okay, this is the definition of the extreme, because I think that depends on the type of work which you are doing. So what should be the definition of extreme? And I think it's imperative to talk about, I mean, to go back, to take a step back and talk about data and the definitions which we are using to conduct our studies. Yeah.
Thank you, Haider. I think even confusion from the sciences is a good news. I think sometimes,
yeah.
sometimes confusion, confidence about confusing things can be much worse than confusion about confusing things. Thank you.
I think this is the beauty of, I mean, of science, that, I mean, we need to take a step back, and then we need to start again from the basics, from the definitions of the, for example, extreme, from about the data, because I think with the advancement in the science, we don't talk much about the basics. We talk about just, I mean, the line from one paper to the other paper to the third paper. But at some point of time, we need to take a step back and think, what are we really doing? I mean, and do we need to make some changes in these basics, in these definitions, or in the type of the data? Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is absolutely fascinating. I had some colleagues in EC mode who were actually working on seeing if even the observed rainfall data was accurate enough because of the way is collected, something to do with the shape of the funnel in which rainfall data is collected. So I think there is that whole kind of inward looking thing about making our data better and better. But I think the overall question also remains that we have now reached a stage of climate change where we are already seeing the impacts happening, and countries who are suffering from data scarcity are kind of at a disadvantage. So what else, given what we have, given what we don't have going forward, I think one big policy implication of study like yours is increased investments in hydromet systems. And there also, I understand that in situ measurement instruments are going down by the day, at least if that's true for river basins and things like that. That's my understanding from our from the hydrologist involved in our IPCC chapter, the number of in situ measurements devices have gone down. So I think one clear policy implication is increased investments in these, good old observation stations. But what else? What else can we do? Are there innovative data? Are there other ways of making up this data gap?
So just to add you, Aditi, I think it's a nice question, and I think in UK, it's going really nice. I think the government is trying to involve public. So we talk about citizen science, and and they have like portals where people have their residents have their own rain gauge stations if someone fancy that, and they can upload data to that portal. So it's really nice to have locals and civilians taking part in this exercise where they can upload data from their own rain gauge station in their backyard. I know it could be messy because there could be transcription errors, human errors, but again, this is a good thing. We are, public is made a part of this whole exercise. It's no more a hydrogeologist or hydrologist work. It's also work of more public. So lots of things are going here in UK. There are PhDs and people working on the citizen science data. Yeah. So I think at some point of time, we need to make more awareness among public. They should be made a part of this exercise, just not some institutions like IITs or big institutions, but it should come to the very local scale. Yeah.
Right. No, that's an interesting suggestion. It also reminds me of the work that some NGOs in Nepal were doing around installing rain gauge stations in schools. And I was reading again, some similar efforts are being done in Kerala. All the schools are being fitted with pretty basic weather stations so that we have that kind of data. So it did not be high tech as long as there's some modicum of quality control. Oh, that's absolutely fascinating. With that, and I do not see any other questions here. So Haider, if you have any final words you would like to add. Okay, no, there's a hand that just went up. Who's that? Please, I can't see whose hand is it.
Yeah,
okay,
Okay.
Shahana. Yes,
Yeah,
Shahana. Go ahead, ask your question.
I was just typing out the question, but
yes, it's interesting. Yeah.
So I just had a question on. So apart from whatever we compare the data precision in evaluating the scaling effect, like what role does the seasonality offer when you evaluate the scaling effect across different data sets? And in that case, which data could be a better fit for a given condition?
So I think it's an interesting question to talk about the seasonality. So there are two challenges. So one challenge is if you're talking about observations, that there will be different challenges in different seasons in collecting data in terms of rain gauge station data. Because if it's snowing, so one thing is that rain gauge station might stop working, or other thing is that there could be a tipping effect. So if it's collecting snow, so there could be a delay in the measurement procedure, yeah. So one thing is the challenges in collecting data from the observations, and other is that what will be the impact of the change in seasons in such studies, in climate change-based studies. So based on our experience, we see, when we talk about scaling the relationships with extreme rainfall and temperature, we see higher scalings for summer seasons as compared for the winter seasons. So this could be, because of the, uncertainty in data coming from the data collection, or because of the convective systems, because in summers we see convections, especially in the tropical countries like India, we see a convective rainfall, which acts as a feedback mechanism to the more intense storms and more intense rainfall extremes, and we see a higher scaling values. So I think we have done this exercise in some of the papers, and we have shown that we see a higher scaling in summers as compared to the other months. Yeah. And for US, especially for winters, this west coast is very tricky. So most of the rainfall, it's snow. And if you start, studying temperature scaling using snow, I mean, it could lead to something, I mean, wrong information. So when I do this analysis, I usually, take all the temperature values which are positive. I mean, I don't take negative temperature values to make it more simple.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Do we have any more hands or questions? If not, I'll ask Haider to have any last comments he may have, and then we will close this webinar.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say that, yeah, I mean, I think, while doing any exercise, I think we need to once check, how good is our data? Is our data really worth to be used in this any type of climate change study? And what are the uncertainties arriving from this data? So we need to check the quality of the data and make sure that, at some level, we must be confident about the quality control of the data. And I know, there is no, this process is not that easy, or there need to be a time where we can stop this quality control process and carry out with the analysis. But at least we should try to make our data better and write it more specific in the papers or in the studies, in the reports about the limitations in the data, rather just focusing more on the results or the fancy messages coming out from the faulty data. So yeah, I think the main theme of my presentation was, to go back, step back and look over the quality of the data. Yeah.
Right. No, that's a very important message, I think. And then to also perhaps at some level advocate for better data in the future for us to be better prepared for climate change. So that's a fascinating talk. We learned a lot of things. I personally learned a lot of new things today. Haider, thank you so much for your talk.
Thank you so much.
And that brings us to the end of the 12th talk in our IWMI India Early Career Researcher series. We have 2 more remaining talks in this series happening in August and September. Then we will close the series for the time being, pending some of my other colleagues in the IWMI India office wanting to take it forward. Thank you so much. This will be, I think, summarized and put on the social media, and the recording will be there on the IWMI website as well.
Thank you so much, Aditi, for giving me a chance. Yeah, thanks for your time.
Absolute pleasure. See you all next month for the 13th talk in the series. Bye. Have a good day.
Bye. Bye.